Hello everyone, ladies and gentlemen, kids of all ages. My name is Avi and welcome to episode 7 of Infinite Alchemy. Last time we got ourselves well situated with a simple storage system, allowing us to store massive amounts of items in a singular iron chest and pull them out at will. This time, we're gonna unlock power! Alas, that will have to wait for a little while. At the end of last episode, I mentioned that I was gonna tidy up the base while we were away, and lo and behold, I am doing just that. Treewood planks allow you to run twice as fast on them, making them a perfect thing to put down as our floorboards instead of our old spruce wood. It even looks pretty similar. And I also want to keep myself away from the rain, so I built this little canopy. That Chrysopoeia spell we got last time is pretty handy. Allows us to turn that silver into gold, then into lead, then into osmium, completing that quest from the last episode that we didn't quite clear off. I start looking at wet sand, because wet sand is required for salt, which is fairly useful. But the only way to make wet sand takes seaweed. Seaweed is kind of difficult because the only way to get seaweed at this moment is through crop breeding. There's a way to get it later, but it's honestly kind of expensive to get it later. So not only is crop breeding the only method we have, it's probably the best one. To do crop breeding, however, we need crop sticks, and for that we need tier 2 fertilizer. I already crafted the tier 1 fertilizer, as you just saw. It took bone meal, ash, and rotten flesh, so nothing hard. And tier 2 fertilizer takes floral fertilizer, the tier 1, immersive seeds, and fertilizer from actually additions. Then that can be combined to get us the crop sticks. So throughout this episode, in the background, I was just breeding up to seaweed. By the end of this episode, I was literally at the end of making seaweed, but unfortunately, I didn't get it in time. So we're gonna have seaweed at the start of next episode, rather than at the end of this one. Seaweed being sidelined, let's get our actual agenda along the way. I want to automate coke ovens, I want to get a better blast furnace, and I thought about getting the arc furnace. We're gonna get into what I actually get afterwards. So let's start with the first of those, which is automating coke ovens. The idea for this is simple. Get a hopping bonsai to automate the wood, and then use retrieval nodes to get the creosote and charcoal out from it. It's a simple idea, it's gonna work, and it's gonna be pretty expandable. Charcoal is pretty self-evident in its usefulness, but creosote is a far more interesting and far more specially useful item. Not only is it going to help me make the insane amounts of treated wood floors that I'm going to need, creosote is also required for creosolum, and the thing is that it actually takes a lot of it. 2 creosolum takes 4 buckets of creosote, so it's not something cheap. I'm using a chunky bonsai for the wood here again, just like I have in the upstairs room. The thing is that I end up realizing that this actually makes far more wood than I need, so I might replace it with just a regular sapling later. I'm honestly not sure. The building of the whole area was so quick that I really didn't even have time to cover it. The thing that is kind of curious is how are we going to store the creosote? Originally, we were using open blocks tanks. However, they're not difficult or necessarily bad, but they kind of don't look great, in my opinion. Not only are they ugly, they're also slightly expensive. I mean, they take 4 obsidian for 2 of them, which I guess isn't a bad deal when obsidian is free, but everything else is free, so... My solution to this is the Tinker Tank, because I really like my multi-block tanks a whole bunch, and this one is a pretty good one. The size that I'm making it, which is going to be a 4x3x3, ends up storing 192 buckets, which is not a bad deal. It's also very cheap to expand. All it is seared bricks in order to make it bigger. I really like Tinker Tanks, and I'm kind of sad that I don't get to use them in as many packs, so finding an excuse to use it in this one was great. especially for storing a large amount of creosote. There's another cool thing that you're going to notice when I hook up the piping, and that's the fact that extra utilities pipes can transfer both fluids and items on the same pipeline, which is why I end up moving the pipes up above the coke ovens rather than below. So I can have the retrieval node for the charcoal and the retrieval node for the creosote on the exact same line, and it doesn't cause any issues, which honestly I find really fun. And I mean, I don't necessarily wish more things did it, but it's kind of cool. Reminds me of Ender.io, which I am unfortunately very far away from. And at this point, we're pretty much finished with our first task of the day, which was to automate coke ovens, and lo and behold, we've done exactly that. We have automated creosote, automated charcoal, straight from those 2 coke ovens, and you know, it's a great deal. I try and make a dirt generator, but I run into a problem, which is that dirt generators are kind of broken in the version of the pack I was playing. If you're playing the most up-to-date version, which is 0.8.4, you should be fine, and this should work. It's just that for recording this episode, I was on 0.8.1, where this is broken. So, don't be like me. Now that we have automated coke ovens, why not make 2 more? I made 54 more coke oven bricks, so we can make 2 more coke ovens, so we can double our speed yet again on producing charcoal and creosote. Honestly, as it turns out, this level of charcoal production, or rather my level of charcoal usage, outpaces my production, though the creosote levels are fine. So I still end up occasionally using furnaces to melt through wood in order to get charcoal, but this ends up being pretty useful. So good move, and that's already one of the things checked off. If you'll recall last episode, or perhaps if I wasn't an idiot last episode, I got stibnite through running copper through the ore refinery. Combining stibnite with pulverized iron allows us to get antimony. Antimony combined with tin in an alloy kiln allows us to get solder. Solder is going to be required for iron mechanical components. That's right, we're going to dip our toes into even more of immersive engineering, starting with our iron mechanical components, which takes 2 iron plates, 2 duraluminum, 2 of the solder, 1 motor, and 1 lead and gold rod. The thing that we can use that component for is it's going to allow us to make water wheels, which will be our first source of power. Just a minute before we get to that, though, I decide to knock out one of the other quests, which is asking for electrum and lesmium, which is as simple as just those new metals put through the forge. And I also make enough blast bricks for yet another blast furnace, so I can have 2 of those like I had 2 coke ovens back in the day. The double blast furnaces is not going to be used for steel, rather I use it to make cactus charcoal, because cactus charcoal allows me to make carbon, which allows me to make steel more efficiently. Speaking of that, I want a lot of cactus charcoal, and the original cactus farm I had wasn't enough, so here's a quick super plot. Let's get back to water wheels, shall we? Water wheels themselves are fairly simple. They require the iron mechanical components that we got, but the real thing is the kinetic dynamo, of which we need 1 of them to actually take up the power for that. The dynamo takes 2 HV wire coils, a refined circuit, which I had 1 of extra for some reason, 2 steel plates, and then 2 zinc and copper rods. The water wheels take the aforementioned iron mechanical components, and they also take a decent amount of treated wood and then a couple of stone axles to make the regular water wheels from Ex Nihilo. Honestly, that stuff was so unimportant that I didn't really care about it, and that settles off the dynamo, and then eventually that settles off the water wheels. Each dynamo can only support 3 water wheels on it, and also I accidentally forgot that we get 1 water wheel for completing the quest, so I guess we have an extra one then. I also, at this point, realized that making the arc furnace is a terrible goal, so instead I set my sights on the metal press. Of course, I'm actually not gonna set up the dynamo and water wheels this early, because I don't have anything to power with them. So I start looking towards the improved blast furnace. Before I get to that, I make the steel mechanical component, which is largely similar to the iron one. However, of course, instead of taking iron, it takes steel plates. And instead of taking a gold and lead rod, it takes an electrum and lesbium rod. I also realize that I'm making these components really badly because I can make them cheaper using an engineer's work table. Significantly cheaper. Not only do they take less resources, they end up getting us more components. So I spend all of 3 minutes making it so I can make these things in an actually good way. I also get a much cheaper recipe for motors. So ultimately, the thing to learn from all of this is check JEI before you make things. And, also don't be dumb, like I am. Anyways, let's make ourselves that reinforced blast furnace. Here we have these blast bricks. You can make them in the explosion furnace, but honestly, it's not much more expensive just crafting them. And then these blast furnace preheaters, which took a decent amount of duraluminum, but other than that, they aren't that bad to make. We also make all of the necessary connectors and relays and wires required to hook everything up. And I should mention that wires are extremely expensive in this pack. Each plate takes 6 ingots, and each plate only turns into 2 wires. So each wire is by necessity 3 ingots, which is honestly a lot. You do, of course, however, get a much cheaper recipe once you have access to algae. We don't have access to algae, so we can't get it. So we have to stick with the pretty terrible recipes before we can actually get anywhere. Anyways, now we're gonna set up our water wheel, and honestly, I did not care how it looked, so it looks extremely ugly right now. I will probably pretty up things later. Aside from that, we can make ourselves the improved blast furnace. So I should talk about what this does. This works the exact same as a regular blast furnace. It just uses power and will run faster. About twice as fast if it's fully loaded with power. Unfortunately, water wheels are really crap at power generation, so it's not going to be running at full power at all times. In fact, it's going to be running at maybe even half power if we're lucky, and less than that if we're running something at the same time. So it's not a perfect solution by any means, but it's something. And it's a nice thing to spend our first bits of power on, especially when that power is totally free. Because steel is a really important thing, and doing this with raw steel allows it to run ridiculously quickly, getting us 2 steel in a matter of seconds, which is good for just about anything we want to do. Of course, just having the improved blast furnace isn't enough reason to put the brakes on everything we're doing. Here I'm making the redstone engineering block, which is an important component of any immersive engineering multi-block structure. In this case, we're going to make the aforementioned metal press, which will significantly cheapen costs of plates, rods, and gears. We got one of the components for it, one of the other one's just a piston, but then also 2 conveyor belts, 1 heavy engineering block, and 2 steel scaffolding. So let's get to it. The heavy engineering block is easily the worst part because it takes a duraluminum, a lesbium, and an electrum gear. All of those are very expensive because, as mentioned a long time back, each gear is 13 ingots. And we just don't have that much lead and osmium, especially since the ways of getting it are so expensive. However, getting silver is relatively easy. All it takes is a transformation spell and silverwood planks, which are near infinite. So I'm using that to get a bunch of silver, and we'll work with that later. For right now, here we can make our conveyor belts, which is as simple as some leather. And then we can make the steel scaffolding, which takes a lot of steel and a duraluminum rod, as well as some solder. I had some gold on hand, so here I'm making 32 electrum just to start. And here, I'm turning 32 of the silver that we already had into 16 lead and 16 osmium using the Chrysopoeia spell. This thing is really useful because silver we can get a crap ton of, whereas lead and osmium are very expensive, even using non-sifting methods. So being able to turn silver into all of those other things is pretty nice, even if it's not necessarily automatable. Getting a head start on things, I make the plate mold that's required to use the metal press. Each mold takes 4 duraluminum plates, and there's only a plate, gear, and rod mold. After making all of that lead and osmium using the Chrysopoeia spell, we can then make both the electrum gear, which we saw previously, and the lesmium gear, allowing us to possibly make the heavy engineering block. You see, I was tricked. Turns out, we don't actually have access to this type of engineer's blueprint until we get research. And we don't have access to research is the thing. So instead, we have to do the slightly more expensive crafting recipe for it. It just takes more steel, so it's not that big of a deal. It's just a bit of a shame. After that, we have everything. It takes 2 steel scaffolding, 1 redstone engineering, 1 piston, and 1 heavy engineering block. And I always end up placing the redstone engineering block wrong for the first time, but after switching it around with the heavy engineering, we've made it. And this allows for much cheaper rods, plates, and gears, which is always very nice to have in a mod pack. Problem is I can't connect it because the line of sight is obstructed, so I move it by 1. Funny enough, the metal press allows us to make plates, rods, and gears all 33% more efficiently. Plates cost 4 plates, rods cost 3, and gears cost 8. I set up the deposit with a dropping conveyor belt, and here's an interesting fact for you. You can't directly load onto the metal press if it takes more than 1 input for it to actually work. You don't normally notice this because in base immersive engineering, it does only take 1 ingot for both metal, for both rods, plates, and wires. But because it takes more than that, you actually need to load it onto a conveyor first. That's the metal press done though. There's only really one thing left. The high oven. The high oven is kind of a weird multi-block in that it's basically the same as the arc furnace, but cheaper. For it, I decided to tear down one of my blast furnaces because I don't really need it anymore. The improved one is good enough without it. Also, now that we have the alloy kiln, we can actually make modularium much cheaper these days. Because modularium, it used to be 1 modularium, 1 bronze ingot. Now we can get 2 for that. The high oven controller takes 2 iron furnaces, so I put my new metal press to good use and start making a ton of iron plates with it. First, we make the reinforced blast bricks that are going to be required for the controller of the multi-block. Then here I'm making the fire bricks required for the furnaces in the multi-block, and the singular fire brick that is required just to build the structure itself. And while I'm at it, I make the rod mold that I needed for the metal press, which I didn't have before. And we can finally do the little crafting tree required for the iron furnaces that we need for the controller block. Additionally, we also need some extra iron plates to make the fluid pipes required for the structure, which also completes a bunch of other tasks that take fluid pipes. And the heat glass that is required for the structure is gone by smelting heat sand, which we've made before for the crucibles. It's just soul sand and tainted soil. With that is the controller for the multi-block. However, we still don't have all of the casings that we need, and we especially don't have all of the hatches that we want. Fortunately, the engineer's work table makes making the motors for those casings ridiculously easy. And we're going to need a good supply of gears, so I set and make the gear mold out of duraluminum. My setup uses 1 normal item input, 1 small fluid input, 1 small item output, and 1 small energy input in order to make the bottom structure. The normal item inputs we can finally make now that we have access to duraluminum. The small ones are things that we've already seen before. The real interesting thing is the normal energy input, which takes an LV coil block. Do you remember me mentioning the fact that wires are actually really expensive in this mod pack? This is the reason why. This coil block takes a ridiculous amount of copper to make, even with the cheaper recipes. That is, of course, only with the cheaper recipes from the metal press. If we had the cheaper recipes using algae, it would probably be a little bit more manageable. But for right now, we bear with it and we make ourselves, finally, the coil block. Then using the coil block, we're able to make the energy input hatch, which we obviously need for the high oven because it takes energy to run. With that, we have everything we need for the high oven. So, of course, I decided to tear down everything and move it again because I'm so indecisive on where I want to place these things. I rebuild the improved blast furnace, and because I've already shown that like 7,000 times in this episode, I don't show that to you people again. And I build the high oven, which is, I mean, it's not even that interesting of a multi-block to build. But there it is, and I also rebuild our metal press that we were using before, which has fully saturated the LV wire relay just so that we can power all of these machines at once. Lord knows we can't run all of these machines at once, though, Jesus. And surprisingly, that's about where we're gonna end today's episode. I'm tidying up the water wheel so that it looks slightly palatable from a distance, but that's everything I really wanted to get done, all finished. I mean, we automated coke ovens, we got the better blast furnace, we got the metal press, and we got the high oven. You know, it's honestly a lot of really good accomplishments that we got through. Last time we only got the, new storage system, and that's great and all, but this, oh wow, we made ourselves a good boon today. Well, that's what I would say if I really thought that. Really though, we kind of just made partial strides towards success, because even though we did get ourselves, some pretty good advancements, we don't have anything close to a consistent and good source of power. We can't power all of these machines at the same time, so it's only a partial victory. Let's try and get ourselves a full victory for ourselves next time.